Are you of one mind or two? And what difference does that make for things like faith in God? Join me this week as I talk with Dr. Joshua Mugg, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Park University, about his new book, From Human Reasoning to Belief. He details an empirical account of belief that helps us make sense of our everyday experiences, as well as those tricky passages in the Bible like, I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. We talk about his account of making better sense of our doubts, anxieties, and even the kind of faith that we're going to enjoy when Jesus returns. So if you like what we do here at the Center for Hebraic Thought and the Biblical Mind podcast, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Or you could leave us that coveted 5-star review. Or, if you're feeling generous, really generous, you could support us directly by going to thebiblicalmind.org/give. But now, on to the show.
This is the Biblical Mind podcast, produced by the Center for Hebraic Thought. Honest 5-star reviews help others find this podcast. Visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org for articles and videos that explore the deep structures of Scripture.
My name is Josh Mugg. I'm a professor of philosophy at Park University. Been here for 8 years. This is year number 8. I'm here in Kansas City, Missouri. Born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Really came up under the pastorage of folks who were at Covenant Seminary, came out of Covenant Seminary, and was encouraged to at a pretty young age to think reflectively about my theology, and ended up graduating high school a year early because I was at public school. I thought what I really want to study is theology, so I went off to a Christian school, Missouri Baptist University, to discover theology and study that. Very quickly realized that the questions that I actually had were not theological in nature. I was interested in the question, how can we know things? What can we know? What is really the fundamental nature of reality? And it's not that theology doesn't have things to say about that, but I remember picking up our systematic theology book, and our first unit was a methodology section. How can we know anything at all, but specifically, how can we know anything in theology? And I found the answers that were offered not satisfying, to put it mildly. And I dialogued with my professors, and they said, "You're asking really good questions, but the questions you're asking are no longer in theology proper. You are asking questions that are epistemic in nature, and you probably should end up going and doing philosophy." And that's not to say that you're doing something wrong. It's just that you have a bit of different interests. So I ended up pursuing graduate school degrees in philosophy. And at the time, I was really interested in trying to figure out, what is the most basic question? What is the first question that we need to get at in an inquiry? And I thought that the first question we have to get at is, how can we know anything? But then, how can we know anything? Well, that surely is going to depend upon what our minds are like. So that led me then to philosophy of mind and metaphysics. So I'm like, okay, actually, I'm going to do philosophy of mind and metaphysics. But then it turned out, well, surely things in science have something to say about the nature of our mind and how we reason, and how we reason has something to do with how we know things. So now I'm doing philosophy of science. So you can see pretty quickly here, I've actually ended up deciding that there is no one place to start. There's no one question that's going to be the foundation of every other question. We sort of have to do bits and pieces of it all together, and really in a community. So I ended up writing a dissertation in philosophy of cognitive science, criticism of dual process theory, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And I really consider myself at this point, I'm a philosopher of mind, philosopher of psychology, and a philosopher of religion. Those are the 3 areas that I consistently publish in, and I find myself going back to thinking about over and over again. What is the mind? Is the human person physical or non-physical, or some kind of hybrid of that? How is it that we reason? What is belief? What is faith? Is one a subset of the other? Are they completely separate? Are they distinct but related? These are the sorts of questions that I find myself thinking about.
Okay. Well, since you brought it up, what is dual process theory and why do you critique it?
Dual process theory is a empirical account of human reasoning and the human mind. And it says that the human mind is divided into, on the one hand, there is fast, automatic, intuitive processing. Sometimes they call this type 1 processing. And then there's slow, effortful, rational, reflective processing, and that's sometimes called type 2 processing. And this is a view that's kind of captured the imagination. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is a popular
just
level
going to
book.
ask.
So if you want to poster child for dual process theory, that's him. Nobel Prize winner for his work showing that humans don't always reason in accordance with our norms of rationality. But then he had, well, why is it that we don't always reason in accordance with the norms of rationality? His answer is, well, the norms of rationality is typically type 2, that reflective processing, that gets it right. But oftentimes that type 1 processing gets it wrong. Even more popularized in like Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, for example. But this is one of the big dogs out there for an empirical account of how it is that humans reason. And I started my dissertation. The plan was I'm going to provide a philosophical account of belief that's empirically informed, and I need to look at the best offer of an empirical account we have on hand, and that looked like dual process theory. So the plan was I'm going to accept dual process theory, maybe, tweak it a little bit, and then I'm going to apply it to how we should understand belief. And very quickly, I realized this dual process theory stuff is actually just an absolute mess. I'm not going to be able to adopt it. I think it's false. And so, I ended up writing a dissertation. My hope was to provide an empirical account of human reasoning that's an alternative to dual process theory, and then apply it to belief. On the prospectus floor, two of the readers said, "There's no way you can do all this in a dissertation. So you're just going to do the first 2 bits: critique of dual process theory, provide your own alternative, and then later on in your career, when you write your first book, you can do that last bit about the nature of belief." And so that's where I am now. That's the book that just came out.
The nature of belief.
Yeah, from human reasoning to belief.
Okay.
So critique of dual process theory, an alternative to dual process theory, and then implications for what a belief is.
So then you would expect people to read both to get a full sense of what you're doing?
No, the book just is all of that. There's 3 portions to the book. You're going to get a criticism of dual process theory. You'll get my alternative to dual process theory, and you'll get implications for the nature of belief.
Okay, good. So then, you talked about what dual process theory is. What is your alternative?
Yeah, so rather than thinking of there being 2 processes, it's either type 1 or type 2, you'll notice that I distinguish those using a whole bunch of properties. Fast, slow. Now, just a second. Is fast and slow, is that an either or? It's a gradation, right?
Yeah. It's not
Okay.
a light switch.
No, it's not. What about automatic controlled? Is that an either or is it more like a gradation?
Automatic or controlled, is that what you said?
Yeah.
I guess I'm tempted to say it's like a light switch. It's either automatic or controlled, but it sounds like maybe it's not.
Yeah, one process might have bits of it that are automatic and bits of it that are controlled. And when you zoom out, when you have to start saying, well, it's either or, you run into problems.
Okay.
So there might be processes that we have that are more controlled versus less controlled. So I can decide something like raising and lowering my hand right now, right? That seems to be very on the high controlled side. There's something like the beating of my heart, which is on the very, very far automatic side. But there's other cases that seem in between, like I can hold my breath, at least for a while until I pass out, at which point If everything's functioning well, I'll start breathing again. That seems like an interesting sort of case, right? And so we're familiar with this in the field of biology, but I think that we can also do something in the field of cognitive science as well, and think of certain cognitive processes as automatic versus other ones as somewhat controlled. So that's a gradation as well. So here's the idea. Take all those properties on the dual process theory, fast and slow, automatic, controlled, inductive versus deductive, conscious versus unconscious. I think that's a gradation as well. Imagine each of those as a slide or a switch on a big old soundboard. So you're a DJ and you've got this big old soundboard, but rather than having, bass and treble and mid, you have fast, slow, automatic, controlled, conscious, unconscious. Some kind of reasoning process problem presents itself to you, and you deliberate, and the output depends upon where those slides and switches are set. You don't have to accept the output, though. You can be like, that's a weird response. That's a weird response, or I don't like that response. And you can then rerun the reasoning process. And you can rerun the reasoning process, adjusting those slides and switches as you go. I'm going to do it in a more controlled way. I'm going to do this in a more conscious way. I'm going to change the mode of operation I'm using. Rather than testing for validity using my if I imagine those two premises are true, does the conclusion have to be true? That's one way of testing validity. You can do it with Venn diagrams. You can do it pictorially, right? These are different modes of operation. You can just do it what feels right to me in this case? There's lots of modes of operation that you can use to test. So you can rerun that reasoning process until you get to a point that you say, yeah, I'm happy with that final state. The more and more you rerun those processes, the more controlled that process is. You can also recruit other beliefs along the way. So here's an example that I use in the book. Suppose I'm on a train, and the train is running late, and it's late in the evening. And I realize I've got a connection to make. Now, this may have actually happened. There's a connection to make, and I start to get a little anxious. Okay, what if I don't make my connection? I don't know anyone in this middling city that I'm in between. I've got a place to stay on the far end, but not in the middle place. My cell phone battery's even running a little bit low. Okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to be late? And so maybe initially I think I'm running late. I'm going to be late for my connection. I'm going to miss my connection. But I might then rerun that process. I might think, well, let's actually do this in a more mathematically rigorous way. Let's go ahead and figure out what time is it now? How much time do I have until I get there? 5 minutes to find the next platform. And find out, okay, actually, I'll have like 2 minutes to spare. Okay, maybe. Then I might reason inductively. Now, wait a second. I'm looking around here. There's other people on this train. I bet other people are going to be in the same situation I am. And it'd be kind of weird if the train company decided to just keep everything running exactly on time. If this is the last train out for that other city, and I see other people kind of checking their phones, I'm like, okay, maybe they'll actually hold back the train. So I'm reasoning kind of inductively or abductively here, at best explanation kind of style. So these are just different styles of argument that I can run through over and over again. And I'm recruiting other doxastic states, other belief states into this process as well. I'm even gathering more information as I'm looking around and noticing that other people are looking at their phones as well. This is a way in which I can exercise a certain kind of control over what it is that I believe. So what I believe, I think, now, is not entirely... Go ahead.
Let me jump in here, because you've got me asking a question I didn't expect coming in. So for someone who is feeling anxious about something, would you say that they are constantly rerunning this with different, dials on the cognitive board there? Or can you talk about that maybe just at first blush? I don't know if you're actually even doing anything with anxiety here, but...
Yeah, so the chapter on emotion is the bit that got cut. I didn't have time to go into
okay.
it. I do want to say that I'm not going to contrast emotion with reasoning. There are some dual process theorists, especially on the social side and in moral psychology, who will say type 1 processing is emotional and type 2 is rational. So they pit emotion versus reasoning. Joshua Green and Jonathan Haidt are two prime examples. who do exactly this. It's emotion versus reasoning. Your gut versus your brain, your heart versus your head. I think that is a ridiculous dichotomy. um, I think that our emotions and our reasoning are very much intertwined. So much so that I don't want to put emotion even as a slider switch on the soundboard. I think that emotion is probably one of those portions that determines whether we rerun and how we rerun that reasoning process. And so someone who's anxious, it's going to depend upon the individual and depend upon the specific case. So I don't think that one emotion does the same thing every time for every individual in every case. But what may be happening is that an anxious individual is rerunning the reasoning process, but in the same way each time. And so they're stuck in a feedback loop. Might be one possibility. So I will say something like cognitive behavioral therapy, the idea is to try to get subjects out of that feedback loop and out of that thinking of it in the same way that's a bad way of thinking about it, and showing them there are other ways to be thinking about this that might be more accurate, actually.
Gotcha. Okay. No, I appreciate you letting me derail you there. Now, I do know in the book you have tied some of what you're doing here to the story in the Gospel of Mark. The father asking Jesus for a miracle. I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. How is that interacting with your soundboard here? What's going on there?
Right. So that's in a way the initial problem that got me kicked off on this whole thing years and years ago.
Hey, Biblical Mind listeners. I know a lot of you work at schools, you run nonprofits, you maybe handle municipal budgets, I don't know. The work you do is incredibly important, and I know how much of your time gets swallowed up by the administrative side of things, specifically trying to find grants. It's honestly exhausting, we know. You end up wasting days digging through messy databases and creating endless spreadsheets and hoping you didn't miss a deadline. If that sounds familiar to you like it does to us, then you should check out a platform called MatchGrant. It's an AI tool, don't hang up yet. Yes, it's an AI tool that was built by actual nonprofit veterans who lived this exact struggle. They know it's real. Instead of you doing the hunting, MatchGrant flips the script. You just type in your website, and the platform automatically maps out your mission against thousands of data points to find the perfect fit funders in just a couple of minutes. It can even show you who's funding peer organizations with similar budgets, and it syncs all of those critical deadlines together right in your calendar so nothing slips through the cracks. Plus, because they know nonprofit budgets are tight, it's actually priced affordably for smaller, leaner operations just like the Center for Hebraic Thought. It's meant to take a massive headache off your plate so that you can get back to your actual mission. Go to matchgrant.co/thebiblicalmind to try it for free or book a quick demo. That's matchgrant.co/thebiblicalmind. Happy matching.
So when the father says, I believe, help my unbelief, that sounds like a straight up contradictory, right? You either do believe or you don't believe. Maybe you're agnostic. You just have no belief one way or the other, because that's one way of understanding agnosticism. But to say I both believe and I don't believe, this sounds like we call this Moore's paradox. If I said to you, it's raining outside, but I don't believe it's raining outside.
Okay.
That sounds like a contradiction. And the so this is G.E. Moore, who's writing in the 20th century. But it seems like we have something like this going on back here in the Gospel of Mark 2,000 years ago. And I think that there's something that kind of resonates with a lot of people with that cry, I believe, help thou my unbelief. So what's going on in there? And I think that actually cognitive science can help us understand what might be going on in cases like this. So some philosophers are going to say, well, really, they are just agnostic. Some are going to say, really, they don't believe, and they also don't not believe. They in between believe. So this is a philosopher by the name of Eric Fitzgerald. He says that really the belief is more of a spectrum rather than an either or. Other philosophers who think that belief is a kind of representation end up saying, well, he doesn't believe, but he does have faith. So you can have faith without belief. This is a view advocated by people like Daniel Howard Snyder and a number of other philosophers who call themselves non-doxastists about faith. I reject both of those, or all three of those views. And the one that I go in for is a view called fragmentation of belief. And this is a view that rather than having one storage system for all of our beliefs, one massive web of belief, we actually have distinct fragments of belief, distinct webs of belief. So I might have one when I am operating in the context of washing my dishes and doing my my cooking. That might be one fragment of belief. I might have a different one when I'm reading a biology textbook. These are going to be distinct fragments of belief. And I might actually have taxonomies that are incongruent between those two. So there's that old question of whether a tomato is a vegetable or a fruit, and scientifically, it's a fruit, not a vegetable. But it might be that within the context of the kitchen, it's perfectly fine to think of it as a vegetable instead. So as I'm making my delicious gazpacho this morning, and I think, oh yeah, I'm going to get all my vegetables out. I found myself thinking that, and I'm grabbing cucumber, which I guess cucumber is also technically a fruit.
Is that true?
I think it has to do with like where the seeds are. If like the seeds are inside,
or if it grows on a vine, or yes, I don't know.
Yeah.
I
know that. Anyway, the way that I'm going to do a taxonomy for the sake of cooking might be different than the way I'm going to do a taxonomy for the sake of biology. And this is actually totally fine. And actually, human cognition, it seems, is actually precisely like that. So human cognition isn't one giant web of belief for all of our beliefs. Rather, we have distinct fragments for different domains of inquiry. And I think that in this case, the father is actually somewhat aware of the fact that he has, in one fragment, tokened the belief, Jesus can heal my son. And in another fragment, he has tokened the belief, Jesus can't heal my son. He's aware of these two distinct beliefs.
Fascinating. I'm thinking this might. I don't know if you were going here intentionally, but we just did a podcast interviewing somebody about the topic of deconstruction. And he very helpfully, I thought, sort of differentiated between two kinds of deconstruction. The person that's out there loudly proclaiming that they are deconstructing is likely the one that's using that as an excuse to, either gain attention or just call attention to the fact that they have rejected some previous set of beliefs. But that the people who are kind of quietly in the process of deconstructing are just actually holding up these things that they've been given to the light of question and are probing those beliefs, sort of in this. It sounds like what you're saying. I believe, but help my unbelief. Like where is the the nature of the deconstruction there? So now, am I remembering correctly? Sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah. So, and just on that, it may well be that part of the funny thing, I mean, ideally, you want all of your beliefs to actually cohere with one another. If your beliefs are contradictory, you are guaranteed to be wrong somewhere. So that's the main reason that you probably want your beliefs to be congruent. And especially, if I get some evidence that seems, ooh, wow, that's really a good reason for me to reject that thing, and you don't, you just hold on to it, it becomes increasingly difficult to track reality. So I think it's generally a good idea to try to get these things to be congruent. And I think a lot of times religion actually is a domain in which we have kind of fragments for the domain of religion, or even the domain of the space of church. And then we have a distinct fragment for operating in other sorts of cases. And so then when you try to bring those two things together and you do find things that are incongruent, you have different ways to go. So I've known plenty of people who, as they put it together, they say, okay, this is how I operate in the normal world. It's actually incongruent with all this stuff I get in religion. I'm going to chuck the religion bit and make it all congruent. That's a way to go. Another way to go is actually I'm going to alter the way that I live my life or the way I conduct myself, or to change a bit of both. I've actually known some sort of cases where you have individuals who see, I really like these rather hard-nosed conservative sort of principles on the one hand, and those seem incompatible with these teachings of Jesus. So I guess I'll reject the teachings of Jesus and not for that. Seems to be less common in society that people go that way, but those are ways to go as well. So all that to say, I do think that oftentimes people do operate with distinct fragments, one within the domain of religion and one within some other domains.
Now, as you're talking about the different domains, I'm curious about even within the same domain. And so here I'm thinking of the book Grounded Theology came out earlier this year. We did an interview with Libby Backfish and Cynthia Schaefer-Elliott, who wrote that. And one of the things that they highlight is that the archaeological evidence of the household from ancient Israel shows that they're worshiping Yahweh right alongside, a couple other gods. And it seems like in some ways there's this aspect of like hedging bets, or like this God is for this and this God is for that. So fertility, for instance, was one of the big things that seems to have been worshipped right alongside. And so you have ideal Israel that gets communicated in scripture, like have no other gods before me, but then actual Israel seems to have a lot of other gods before me. And so that kind of feels like it's all in the same fragment though, doesn't it? Or talk about that.
Yeah, that's probably right. So I don't think that domains are divided up they need not to be super, super tidy. And although you might think, okay, there's domain of religion, domain of science, these two actually, there's overlap between those two. Religion makes scientific claims. Science might be actually informed by certain norms. Religion has certain norms. So you can have like partially overlapping fragments. And there's, in cognitive science, we actually have something called the domain problem, because we oftentimes think, well, there are certain capacities. We have a capacity for language. Well, what's the domain of language? And how is it exactly is it distinct from, say, the domain of mathematics? And although prima facie that seems like, okay, those are two nice, neat, tidy categories, when you delve down in it, it turns out that they might be actually a bit more hard to parse out. And it also depends upon how fine-grained you want to go. So I can go with the domain of religion, super, super broad category. But you can begin to parse that domain down more. Domain of religion with regard to fertility. Domain of religion with regard to eating. Domain of religion with regard to my social interactions with other individuals. Social interactions with my in-group. Social interactions with my out-group. So you can actually barrel down these domains narrower and narrower. I don't have a view on how exactly that problem gets solved, except to say that it seems somehow cognitively we do solve it. Because every time I think of an issue, I don't have to bring to bear every belief that I have. Okay. I only bring to bear certain issues, and it has to do with the domain of inquiry.
Interesting. So now you got me thinking about why we believe some things with so little evidence, where we believe some things, or the burden of proof for other things is significantly high. And I'm thinking here specifically of things like conspiracy theories. How would that fit in with what you're doing here?
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. So I'll just get a definition out there of what I think a conspiracy theory is. I think of conspiracy theories as theories that are unfalsifiable because any evidence you give against it just ends up being evidence that somebody planted that evidence.
Mm,
Right? That's how I think of conspiracy theories. And so you're kind of insulated from any objection, any counter evidence coming in. Um, Once you're in the conspiracy theory, it's easy to see why it's very hard to get out of the conspiracy theory. Because
okay,
anytime you give
sure.
evidence, if my son's watching the X-Files right now, so I'm rewatching much of it with him. So anytime you give Mulder some evidence that it seems actually it's not the little green men, you can say, but it's because the government planted the evidence that it's not little green men. So I'm not sure if my theory has anything in particular to say about conspiracy theories. I think that any account of how it is we reason is going to have to make sense. Is going to have to make sense of the fact that that is the structure of a conspiracy theory.
Okay. Well, so then are there any other places kind of in, we'll say, current practice for Christians that your work would resource them to handle well? Is there anything that you think you see your work being particularly beneficial for?
I think there is a functional acceptance of something like dual process theory in popular audiences. So when I talk about dual process theory initially, head versus heart, emotion versus reasoning, fast versus slow, intuitive versus reflective, people generally say, "Oh, I can understand that. I can get that," and they can usually point to examples in their own life. Oh yeah, especially the emotion versus reasoning sort of case. I felt afraid, even though I knew that there was no need to be. Walking over the Grand Canyon, they have a glass floor, and you look down. You believe so firmly that you are safe, and yet you look down and you are terrified. I won't walk out on the glass floor. I'm too scared of heights to do that. Even though
Sure.
if you ask me, do you believe that that's going to support? Absolutely. If you put carpet over that glass, I will walk out on it gladly. That'd be fine. Do I believe that the carpet is somehow supported? No, absolutely not. So I can even feel that pull towards dual process theory. However, this hard dichotomy between emotion on the one hand and reasoning on the other, I think is actually epistemically dangerous. Because I think that what our emotions do in part, I don't say this in the book, but I think what our emotions are doing in part is actually giving us some epistemic information. So it's telling us that something is on or off. So if one says, this doesn't feel right, I wouldn't say therefore just accept that it's not right, but rather engage in the inquiry, reflect on that. What are your reasons for it? Dive deeper into that. Pay attention to what your emotional states are, and engage in that rerunning of the reasoning process. And so I think dual process theorists can end up pigeonholing us in that kind of dualism of emotion versus reasoning, depending upon your version. I think my alternative gives us, I think, a healthier way to see the integration of reasoning within emotion and emotion within reasoning.
Do you feel like that is more biblically faithful in the way that the Bible talks about human persons and the way that they think and feel and operate and believe and not believe?
My method within this book is to stick with the cognitive science. So someone who's totally a naturalist could read this book, and I would hope could follow the conclusion all the way to the end. My understanding of emotions in the Bible come especially from the Psalms, and it seems to me that I see the psalmist oftentimes working through their emotions, sometimes where the emotion is kind of in the wrong, actually, and they seem to work themselves through that process. Other times they're angry or they're sad, and gosh, they're right to be so. Uh, Sometimes anger is the kind of thing that fuels us on towards correcting injustice. So Maisha Cherry is a philosopher who's advocated for that. I think to great effect. But it can also be a sort of fire that consumes us. Um, and it seems that both can be the case. And so I think the idea that emotion should be the kind of thing that should be investigated and lead us to rerun certain reasoning processes, or sometimes actually stop the reasoning process as well. By the way, some emotions are going to, I think, have a ceasing sort of function for reasoning process as well.
So I'm going to ask you what may be an unfair question, and I want you to punt. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. But I'm curious if you think in the eschaton, Jesus comes back, the resurrection of the dead, right? We are, living here in His reign forever, right?
Mhm.
Does I believe help my unbelief persist?
So I believe Paul says faith, hope, and love, but only love remains. Faith and hope go away. And I think the reason why hope goes away is because I can't hope that I will do a podcast interview with you, Mike. Because here we are doing it, right? I got the
Yeah.
thing. Like, it's not that it would be irrational for me to hope for that. It's just I can't hope for it. It's not possible because we've done it, right? Faith is like that too. If I am absolutely certain of something, then it seems I can't have faith. Faith precludes at least subjective certainty. And so faith that Jesus is Lord, one can't have faith that Jesus is Lord if one is in the eschaton, where it's 100% evident to one. Now, faith, I should say, is I'm thinking of faith as a cognitive state here. And so faith, I can have faith that all sorts of things. I can have faith that Jesus is Lord, faith that Jesus rose from the dead, but faith also in non-religious cases. I can have faith that my marriage will survive despite the horrible statistics on divorce rates, right? I can have faith that, probably most importantly, I can have faith that my favorite sports ball team is going to pull ahead even when they're behind, right? And people will use that kind of language, right? In the case of sports. And so it might be that in the eschaton, you can have faith that these sorts of other sorts of cases. So, maybe there'll still be football, and maybe we'll still have the World Cup in
God willing,
the eschaton,
right?
and I can have faith that my favorite team will pull ahead. Those sorts of cases would still be open to.
Got it. All right.
I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
No, I appreciate that, and sorry for putting you on the spot with that. Now, you and I have spoken before about the, I guess, the impact of Michael Polanyi, Esther Meek in your work and personally. I'm curious to hear a little bit from you, maybe some of the personal narrative there.
Sure. So like I said, at one point in time, I was really interested in figuring out what is the most fundamental question that we should answer. That's the starting point, because it seems like any question you answer, you can then back up and say, but that assumes this question, an answer to this question. And so that backed me up into epistemology, backed me up into philosophy of mind, backed me up into metaphysics, and then circling back to epistemology, I guess. It's that circling back, actually, that I think Polanyi and Meek helped me do. So this is moving away from a view sometimes known as foundationalism within epistemology, where you end up with some bedrock, properly basic, hopefully, beliefs. And those are kind of the bottom of a pyramid. And on those properly basic beliefs, you build everything. So Descartes is probably the most famous example of this. If I have any reason to doubt it, I'll throw it out. So a strong evidentialism as well, combined with foundationalism. And then you have people who reject the evidentialism, but maintain the foundationalism. So people like Alvin Plantinga, for example, reject evidentialism, but they do maintain that structure, that there have to be some kind of properly basic beliefs. Polanyi and Meek were part of my move towards more of a sort of coherentism, where things do circle back on one another, and you can have so you have more of a structure that's more like a web or more like a raft that's put together, and these things cohere better or worse with one another. And it's not that this view is somehow immune from criticism. But I think it's moved me more in a direction of seeing, well, I have my own web of belief, or at this point, I think webs of belief, since I'm a fragmentationalist about belief. And I'm also doing this not alone. This is the other really important part, is that knowing rarely, if ever, is something that we do in isolation. I'm part of a community. I'm actually part of a guild of philosophers. If you ask me what is a philosopher, I would actually say it's to be a member of the guild that calls itself philosophers, that are engaged in this weird thing that we do. And yeah, I'm a member of this community where I'm doing this bit over here, they're doing that bit over there, and we're trying to see how all of these bits kind of cohere together. And so the social aspect of knowing and the more coherentist kind of structure are two things that I've taken away from Polanyi and Esther Meek. And they're of course not the only two philosophers that have pushed me more so in this direction.
Now, maybe final question for me. Curious then, you mentioned the guild. How does the guild receive, your work as a Christian philosopher? Do you find yourself needing to code things, like you said a little bit earlier about your book, in merely what was the word you used? Not empirical, but
Naturalistic.
Naturalist, yeah. Terms like, how does that work for you in the field of philosophy here?
I really have two philosopher hats that I wear. So one philosopher hat is one I wear as a philosopher of psychology, empirical form philosopher of mind, and there I'm going to places like the Society for Philosophy and Psychology, Southern Society for Philosophy and Psychology. And in there, I am kind of engaged in a fairly natural, naturalistic methodology. So it's not that I assume that there is no non-natural stuff, but rather it's I'm going to look at empirical evidence and I'm going to build my account of the mind using empirical method, and onward we go. So in that context, if I were to say, well, here's a Bible verse, therefore it's true, that would not be taken seriously at all within that community, and I know that, so that's not what I do. I might quote it because it's recognized in that community that the Bible is a really important piece of literature, whether one likes it or not, which is why I have the quote from Mark right up front. And people in that community are very much interested in understanding why it is that people have religion, what religious beliefs look like, whether religious belief isn't actually a belief, whether it's something else. Maybe it's a religious credence that's more like a pretense, or maybe it's a faith state that's something different, or maybe it's that in-betweeny belief. What's going on in those cases? So I'm interested in those projects on the one hand. And then I have this other hat that I wear as a philosopher of religion. And here I'm talking to people within the Society for Christian Philosophers. And there's Christian philosophers of all sorts of stripes in there. And that's actually one of the things I love about the SCP, just how ecumenical it is, and the fact that even when I go to a meeting, not everyone there is even a theist necessarily. And so long as I'm clear about what my assumptions are, they're kind of happy to go along and let's make sure that the method that you're using is appropriate to the question that you're asking and the audience that you're speaking to. So in there, I've done some work on the mind-body problem, assuming a Christian view of the resurrection, the nature of the resurrection, and arguing that should push us towards being physicalists about the human person and giving up on the idea that there is an immaterial soul that is somehow the I. So I am my body, kind of view. And I do use scripture in those sorts of cases, actually, because I know that the people that I'm appealing to regard it as authoritative. I recognize that those papers are not going to be of much interest to someone who is outside of that audience. And so I just think about what audience I'm writing for and who I'm talking to when I'm writing. And so there's different questions that Christian philosophers are going to ask in virtue of being Christian philosophers. But I think a lot of the questions that philosophy broadly is asking, what is a belief? Christian philosophers should be interested in as well. What is faith? These are questions that not only Christians might ask, but secular philosophers as well. Many secular philosophers are engaged in the question of what is faith and its relationship to belief, precisely because they recognize even if you're not religious, faith is an important part of human life. It might involve faith in a certain political party or a certain political movement. It might involve faith in the goodness of humanity. It might involve something more locally, like faith in the flourishing of my children in the future, or the flourishing of my marriage or my friendships. And so faith is the kind of thing that isn't only germane to a religious context, but is probably germane to other contexts as well. And so I think that secular and Christian philosopher alike can be interested in those sorts of questions.
I'm extremely tempted to refer to this as your dual hat theory. If we could do that. Okay. Yeah, that's my gift to you here. No, we'll have to have you back on because I'm now super curious about these non-theistic members of the Society of Christian Philosophers that you just mentioned, and then we've often talked, either in articles or podcast interviews about the you are you, and you are a body soul mix. Like there is no clean distinction between these two things. So would love to have you back to talk about that at some point.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Well, Dr. Josh Mugg, thank you so much for your time and wisdom here today.
Thanks, Mike.
You've been listening to the Biblical Mind podcast, exploring the deep structures of Christian scripture. For more, visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org. Subscribe to this podcast at all the usual places so you never miss an episode.